Was it worth it?
I'm not going to get into the personal stuff. It's a very nicely framed question, but I'm still going to resist the temptation. You can see and maybe hear that I'm smiling. But
we're broadcasting live from the Founders Forum, which brings together some of the most inspiring entrepreneurs, global leaders, and investors to discuss the benefits of new technology and how technology can be used for good. Throughout the show, I'm going to be speaking to many fascinating individuals attending the event about their relationship with technology and how we can all benefit from innovations in the tech industry. I'm joined now by a familiar face from a different world. It's only Matt Hancock, Conservative MP for West Suffolk and former Health Secretary. Matt, welcome to the programme. You are a self-confessed techie, as I understand it, and I think even developed your own app for your constituency, the first MP to do so. So where does this interest in tech spring from?
Well, it comes right from way back when. I grew up in a family in which my mum and my stepdad ran a tech business. You know, when you type your postcode into the internet and it brings up your address. We did that.
And funnily enough, I was talking to someone the other night who's invented the kind of upgrade on that, which is that 3-word thing.
What 3 words? That's
three
absolutely
words?
Brilliant.
So
I, as a teenager, I was growing up in a family where mum ran the business and Bob, my stepdad, he wrote the code. And I was, absolutely absorbed in the technology. So that was from an early age, and then I went into politics ultimately because the business nearly went bust when a big customer couldn't pay their bills, and that made me say, well, how does the whole system work? Why is a perfectly good business at such risk? And
quite stressful to be aware of that as a child as well. Yeah. The idea that it was your mother's business, wasn't it?
It was both of them, and it was but everything was on the line, and they employed about 20 people, and there was a week in which if a check didn't arrive by the end of the week, then we were going bust, and it's seared on my soul as a teenager, watching that, having discussions around the kitchen table every night about the business, and that actually made me interested in the bigger picture, and the whole system, and I studied economics and ended up in politics, and then in ministerial roles where I could try to tackle these sorts of problems. And one of the upsides of being on the backbenches is that you can choose the areas that you want to concentrate on, and I think that I'm here. Almost everybody around us have started businesses and created amazing organisations.
And they all look about 12 as well.
Well, there's a big mix of ages. That's true. And I'm just trying to listen to what role government needs to play, which sometimes is getting things out of the way, but sometimes a supporting role as well. Especially for the technologies that are going to change the world and solve some of the really big problems that we face.
Well, on that note, obviously you were Health Secretary, and your predecessor, Jeremy Hunt, has written a book about his time as Health Secretary and stated that the NHS was a rogue system and there were major structural issues that needed fixing. What do you make of that description of the NHS, and do you think that technology can spring to the rescue in terms of making the NHS more user-friendly and perhaps taking some of the pressure off?
Yes, there's no doubt that if the NHS embraced technology as much as it could, then the pressures on waiting times and the pressures on the system would be less.
So what's stopping it embrace technology, and do you recognise the rogue system description?
No, I'm more. I think that you effect change in a large organisation more through positive examples of success. And
you mean rather than attacking it like Jeremy Hunt?
I think it's far better to talk in the positive frame, especially a very large, much loved organisation that needs to embrace modern technology. And during the pandemic, we did some of this. We put out a new system right at the start of the pandemic to say this is how you can ensure that you can use modern communication systems, yet also protect people's data at the same time. And that was transformative. And I had people on the ground, people running, nurses who were running wards saying that one pager you put out about how we can communicate radically improved the way that we operate on the ground and saved everybody a lot of time. So that's just one example. But you have a very large organisation that is culturally quite cautious, that needs the permission to change. And you do that best not by berating it, but by saying, this is where we can go, and this is how, if you're running a ward in a busy hospital under great pressure, this is how we can make your life easier to give you more options. Because ultimately, what is technology? It's giving us as humans more options for how we can solve problems. And that's at one level highfalutin, but when it comes down to you're running a ward and suddenly a thing says, as long as you're properly careful about it, you can use WhatsApp, for instance, to communicate, which wasn't allowed before, then suddenly you can organise how you arrange your activity better. So that's a really practical end, and some of the technology we're seeing here is radically transformative.
But do you wish you were still health secretary then? Because it must feel like you left a job half done, quarter done.
Well,
we
did make a lot of progress, and I'm very glad we made some of the progress we did before the pandemic struck. So for instance, for almost everybody who had a vaccine, and that is now, thank goodness, almost everybody, it was one of the best experiences they had of the NHS. Normally, how long did you wait for your first vaccine? Maybe 10 minutes? Less than that.
It's about 5 minutes because I was so old.
And do you know why people waited so little time? Because we started with the data architecture in terms of the call and recall system and the timing of when people got appointments. And we started with that.
That's why I'm asking, do you wish you were still health secretary? Because clearly those innovations made a difference and made something that often feels clunky and not fit for purpose feel actually extraordinarily modern for a brief moment.
Yeah, well, being on the back benches, I can now I can bring the same argument to bear on a lot of different areas. So for instance, this morning I've been talking about the future of food and how do you have non-animal based meat products that are not like Quorn, which has been around forever, and in my
I think there's someone here,
disgusting.
isn't there, who's made a new steak that isn't steak.
Exactly. And now the Food Standards Agency has an important role in making that happen here. We want it to be done properly and rigorously. So there is a role for government in making that happen. And so that's just one example of the many different technologies that can help tackle climate change and solve some of the problems that the world's got.
Let's talk a bit about your dyslexia campaign, because yesterday you introduced a private member's bill in Parliament calling for universal screening and better teacher training around dyslexia. And I think prompted by your own personal experience, you weren't diagnosed until you were in your early 20s, is that right?
Till I was 18. 18, yeah. My first term at university, I'd got through school on my maths, and that got me to Oxford, so to a very good university. But into an essay-based subject, and at the end of my first term, my amazing tutor, Michael Hart, took me to one side. He said, look, you can talk the talk, but you can't translate that onto the page. I think you need to be diagnosed. And the diagnosis was absolutely critical for me, because I then got the support. The university gave me the support. He taught me how to read and write. But still today, only 1 in 5 dyslexic children gets identified at school. And there's this huge...
Quite surprising, isn't it? Because, it's something that we talk about. It's in common parlance. It's not some unusual...
Yeah, although we talk about, like many of these things, we talk about it more now than we did a couple of decades ago. But still, this 1 in 5 figure had been in my head for years, and I hadn't been in a ministerial position to sort it out. So when I returned to the back benches, this is one of the things I want to do. And so I asked the Department for Education for an update on this 1 in 5 figure, and it was exactly the same. No progress had been made. So we need to have screening that's universal, because the other thing that you find, which is a real injustice, is that people in private schools, about 7% of the population, tend to get tested much, much more frequently. Because essentially there's the resources and the wherewithal to do it. And so there's a social justice aspect to this as well, and so it is about getting the support so that people can reach their potential. And I was lucky, but we all know what happens if you don't get that support. You can't read and write. It's a terrible fact that 57% of people in prison have a reading age of less than 11. So, but on the other hand, there's another wonderful statistic, which is 40% of successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic, right? And here we are at this sort of entrepreneurs conference, and that tells you that if you get, the creative mind tends to have more lateral thinking, more creativity, which is the sort of skills that we increasingly need in the modern workplace. But you do need that support to be able to get through.
And it's education, exactly. Look, last year had its challenges for you. You resigned as health secretary after being caught breaking COVID rules. How difficult a decision was it to make, and how does it feel now? Because you're one of the very few people who did fall on your own sword, as it were. Do you feel like maybe you shouldn't have resigned?
No, I do not.
But it must feel, irritating to see the Prime Minister having broken the same rules and not resigning.
Well, it is what it is. I resigned, and I took.
No, you can vent.
I in the privacy of our
little cosy chat.
That's right. I resigned because I'd written these or signed off these guidelines, and the honest truth is, Mariella, I expected to massively miss the ministerial office. It took me about 24 hours to get over that, and I've been able to. Why did you
feel you should resign? Did you feel like I've done the wrong thing? I've been caught doing the wrong thing. I've got to go.
Yes.
And are you surprised that other people don't have that same?
I
very
can see
clear
where this line
strategy?
of conversation's going, but I tell you this, and I honestly, I think this is an important point, and especially coming from me having resigned, perhaps it has more force, which is that changing a prime minister is a much bigger question, and you have to take everything more broadly into account. For instance, the Prime Minister's international leadership on Ukraine, is incredibly important for protecting the principle that's kept the world safe for 70 years, that you can't invade your neighbour just because you're stronger or think you're stronger.
Indeed, but it's a sort of popular position to take, isn't it, to be anti the invader in that situation?
No, but
it's not a very difficult choice.
It's not just that he took that side of the argument; it's that he then galvanised the international effort. The proof point of that is what Vladimir Zelensky says. And so you have to ask that bigger question. And there's so many things that we need to get on with. That's the thing that I find energizing, but also I really want the whole thing to move on, because there are things that we need to do to make sure that we unleash these new innovations and make the UK the home. This is, especially post-Brexit, something we can really succeed in, making us the home of where these new developments are taking place.
But you have to have voters' confidence, and if they feel that people are prepared to behave badly and not take the repercussions, which one can't level at you, then it makes them feel less confident about being asked to make sacrifices, to make changes to their lives, to go through the current credit crunch, all of those things. It makes it much harder. The Prime Minister faced a confidence vote. He won it, but 148 of his MPs voted against him. Do you really have confidence in him, and do you think that voters should have confidence in someone that's let them down to that extent?
Yes, a win is a win, and let's get on and move forward. That's my view. And there's because there's so much to do. Both on of course on the cost of living side, where the government has taken really quite significant action and clearly there's a big macroeconomic challenge, and we've seen that from the decision at lunchtime by the Bank of England today. But then also on the micro side, if you like, on how we're going to ensure that technologies can improve people's lives and solve some of these big challenges. There are a whole series of areas where we need to get on with the day-to-day bread and butter of solving problems that people face, and the best way to do that is to have the bandwidth at the top of government really focused on that. And the
Times Education Commission published their report yesterday, and one of the things that they identified was a kind of a not a particularly impressive way in which tech is taught to children and coding is taught to children in schools. Do you think that we need to upgrade the education system to be more fit for the 21st century?
Yes, there you go. There's another example of the things we need to do. So I haven't seen that report, and I was closely involved in getting coding into schools. I was in the department at the time. It was Michael Gove really who did it, but I was the junior minister. And that was into primary schools. But, the whole education system needs to change to the way that the world works now. It's much more collaborative, much less about straight line thinking, more about empathy and human connection, and how you create and build things. And that is there is a huge change that needs to happen. You need to combine the rigour of ensuring that every child gets especially the English and the maths that they need, and including dyslexic children, which is particularly close to my heart
You're
because
very
of
good
my
at
lived
keeping all of
experience.
these things in a thread in your head.
Well, that's kind of you to say. It really matters to me. And then, but there's more to the education system than the straight line stuff. There's the teaching people the ability and the confidence to get out there and be creative. And this is Britain's role in the 21st century. We have an amazing opportunity to really embrace some of these changes that are going to that are changing the world and are going to change the world even more. I find it very energizing.
I'm more of a pragmatist than a romantic, and you've lost a lot for love. I wonder if you think it's worth it. Your top line job, that you're clearly at something you're still very passionate about, and of course you can make more change when you're in government than when you're on the back benches. And of course, family life changed dramatically. Is it worth it? Was it worth it?
I'm not going to get into the personal stuff. It's a very nicely framed question, but I'm still going to resist the temptation. You can see and maybe hear that I'm smiling, but there is a and
so that
Gina,
means you're happy.
Well, Gina and I are going up Mont Blanc next month, raising
yes,
money.
That's what I want to ask you about. That's my final question to you.
So we're going to
anticipated
we're going to do
Tell
that
me about
together,
it.
and raising money for the Cambridge Children's Hospital. Again, so it's Cambridge Children's Hospital, one of the 40 new hospitals, and I put 100 million of taxpayers' money towards that when I was Health Secretary. But to be a really amazing cutting-edge paediatric hospital, it needs more support than that. They're aiming to double the money that the taxpayers, that every listener has contributed already. Because in Cambridge we've got this amazing health technology, we've got brilliant world-class clinicians, and like Great Ormond Street, we can create a hospital that is absolutely globally cutting edge, but it needs a bit more support than what the standard amount that an NHS hospital gets, which I was able to contribute as Health Secretary.
So tell me, you're not definitely going to be training for climbing Mont Blanc here today, because it's 33.9 degrees it's gone up to.
Yeah.
So tell me about the training, and are you a bit of a fitness fanatic?
Yeah,
I mean, you were Health Secretary after all.
No, I love staying fit, and I did the marathon last year, and before that I've raced in horse races at Newmarket, in my constituency. And
have you done mountaineering? Are you afraid of heights?
I have not yet had a problem with heights. I hope I tell you that in 2 months' time. I've got 5 weeks to go. Doing a lot of training.
How do you train to climb Mont Blanc?
Well, there are 3 parts to it, really. The first is just basic fitness. So I was out at 6 o'clock this morning going for a run, and just so basic level of fitness. The second is strength, particularly upper body strength for the bit that's
for
climbing.
Hanging on.
Yeah. And then the third, which you actually can't do anything about in advance, is altitude. So we're going out a week before to spend as much time in high altitudes as possible. That nearly came out wrong. As much time at high altitudes as possible, so that our bodies can get used to the altitude, because that's the only way you can mitigate against the risk of altitude sickness. So I've been training, and if you go on Just Giving and search for my name and Mont Blanc, then you can make a contribution too.
Well, thank you very much. Just one final question. Any chance of a return to frontline politics anytime soon? It does sound like you're incensed and ready to go on a number of topics.
Well, I'm in no rush. I'm enjoying the time on the backbenches. As I say, I can concentrate on the things I really care about. I'm learning, and I think that times to refresh are important. And in some careers they have the times out sort of built into it. That doesn't happen in politics. It's much more rough and tumble than that. But so I'm in no hurry. But I also, in all honesty, Mariella, being a backbench MP representing 80,000 people in Parliament, being able to raise issues both of national and local importance, that is an incredibly important job that I take very seriously and find very rewarding.
I said last question, but what's your favourite tech invention? Have you got something on the tip of your tongue, or something that you'd like to see invented? I'm going to ask everyone today.
The number one thing I'd like to see invented is nuclear fusion. Somebody made a brilliant point at an earlier session this morning, that if you look at the sci-fi books from 50 years ago, every invention that doesn't need energy has now been invented. You know, talking computers, touch screens, a whole load of things. Every invention that requires extra energy has not yet been invented because energy is still so constrained and so politicized. Nuclear fusion is closer than it ever has been, and it's an area where the UK leads. The ecosystem around Oxford and Oxfordshire is literally the best ecosystem in the world for this, and if we can pull it off, it will solve our energy problems, and wouldn't that be a fine thing?
That would indeed be a fine thing. Let's see if you can sort it out this afternoon. You're definitely in the right company, aren't you? Matt Hancock, Conservative MP for West Suffolk and former Health Secretary, thank you so much for speaking to us today at the Founders Forum, and best of luck with the climb up Mont Blanc. Get that upper body strength going just in case you're hanging on in a crevasse. I'm not trying to scare you, but there you go. Coming up in the next half hour, we remember the life and times of the sultry-voiced mezzo-soprano